Audrey Werro came to Birmingham with something to prove. Not because she was an unknown athlete. Not because she needed to convince anyone that she belonged among Europe's best. She had already done that. In 2026, Werro had shown the kind of speed that puts an athlete into a completely different category. She had gone under 154, running 1 minute 53 seconds and 8 milliseconds in Paris, a performance that placed her among the fastest women ever to run the 800 meters. So when she stepped onto the track in Birmingham for the European Championships, the expectation was simple. Make the final, and from the opening seconds of her semifinal, it looked like that plan was working perfectly. Werro was composed. She was positioned exactly where she needed to be. She wasn't wasting energy, she wasn't panicking. And as the race moved toward its decisive stages, she looked like an athlete who knew exactly what she was doing. But the 800 meters can change in a fraction of a second. One step, one touch, one mistake. Sometimes that's all it takes, and on this night in Birmingham, Audrey Werro was about to find that out in the most dramatic way possible. But before we get to what happened, we need to understand just how much was at stake. Audrey Werro had entered 2026 as one of Switzerland's biggest track stars. Her rise had been incredibly fast. She wasn't simply running respectable times anymore. She was challenging the very best. That 1 minute 53 seconds and 8 milliseconds performance in Paris had changed the conversation around her. Suddenly, Werro wasn't just another talented 800-meter runner. She was one of the women capable of changing the outcome of a major championship final. And Birmingham presented the perfect opportunity. The European Championships brought together some of the biggest names in the event, including Keely Hodgkinson and other elite 800-meter specialists. For Werro, reaching the final wasn't supposed to be an impossible task. It was supposed to be the next step. Then came the semifinal. The athletes walked onto the track. The stadium was ready and the pressure was enormous. In an 800-meter semifinal, there is almost no room for error. The race begins fast, but it doesn't end with the first 200 meters. Athletes have to balance speed with positioning. Move too early, and you can destroy your finishing power. Move too late, and you may find yourself trapped behind other runners. And when the field gets crowded, even the smallest amount of contact can have enormous consequences. Werro knew that, so she settled into the race. The opening stages were controlled. Nobody wanted to completely destroy their race in the first lap. The athletes began sorting themselves into position. Werro stayed close enough to the leaders to remain dangerous, but she didn't appear desperate. She was waiting for the moment when the race would really begin. As the first lap developed, the pack remained compact. And that is where the tactical battle of the 800 meters becomes so interesting. Every runner is looking at the athlete in front of them. They're also thinking about the athletes beside them. Where is the next gap? Who is moving? Who is slowing? Where can I go when the pace increases? For Werro, the objective was clear. Stay out of trouble, stay in contention, and save enough energy for the final 200 meters. Then the race began to accelerate. The runners moved deeper into the second lap. The finishing line was still ahead, but now every position mattered. Werro remained involved in the battle. She wasn't dropping back. She wasn't losing contact. She was right there. And for a moment, everything looked completely normal. This was exactly the kind of position you would expect from one of the fastest 800-meter runners in the world. Then came the final bend. This is where championship races are often decided. Athletes begin fighting for the best line. They move closer together. The available space becomes smaller, and every step becomes more important. Werro was still in the fight, still within reach, still looking like an athlete on her way to the European Championship final. And then, everything changed. On the bend, Werro went down. In an instant, the race she had spent more than a minute carefully controlling was turned upside down. She hit the track. The athletes around her continued forward, and the stadium suddenly had a completely different atmosphere. This wasn't about tactics anymore. This wasn't about saving energy. This wasn't about winning the semifinal. Audrey Werro was on the ground, and the biggest question became, what had just happened? The replay provided the answer. The incident occurred in the crowded pack on the bend. There was contact between Werro and French runner Anne Bourgoin, with the contact affecting Werro's right foot. At 800-meter racing speed, that tiny moment can be enough to destroy an athlete's balance. Werro couldn't stay upright. She went down hard. And the incident also affected Lithuania's Gabija Galvydaitė. This is important because the fall was not simply a case of Werro making an obvious running mistake. The officials reviewed what happened, and that review would become one of the most important parts of the entire story. But first, Werro still had to finish the race. She got back up, and she continued. That alone tells you something about the mentality of an elite athlete. She knew the race was effectively gone. She knew she had lost the position she had worked for, but she kept running. Werro eventually crossed the line in 2 minutes 35 seconds and 35 milliseconds, a time completely irrelevant to what she was capable of running, because this was never a normal 800-meter performance. It was the result of an athlete falling during a championship semifinal and then finishing after the incident. For most athletes, that would have been the end of the story. Semifinal over, final dream gone. But Audrey Werro's night was not over. The officials reviewed the incident, and after examining the contact, Werro was reinstated. That decision completely changed the situation. The athlete who had appeared to be eliminated from the European Championship was suddenly back in contention. And this wasn't just important for Werro. It changed the entire context of the final, because now the question became, could Audrey Werro recover from the fall and actually compete? That is a very different challenge. Running an 800-meter race requires enormous physical effort, but recovering from a hard fall and then preparing for another elite race requires something else. Physical recovery, mental recovery, and confidence. The physical side is obvious. A hard impact can leave an athlete with bruising, soreness, or other issues that may not be immediately visible. And in an 800-meter final, there is nowhere to hide. The pace will be fast, the positioning will be aggressive, the contact will be unavoidable. So even if Werro was cleared to compete, that doesn't automatically mean she would be physically unaffected. Then there is the psychological side. Imagine being one of the favorites. You have spent months preparing for this championship. You're approaching the final bend. Everything is going according to plan. And suddenly, you're on the track. That moment can stay in an athlete's mind. Especially in an event where athletes have to race closely together. But this is where we have to be careful. One fall does not mean Werro suddenly has a problem with championship racing. And it certainly does not mean this incident will damage her career. In fact, the opposite argument can be made. Werro's career has already shown that she can handle enormous pressure. She has run at an elite level. She has produced one of the fastest 800-meter performances ever.